Welcome. This video is going to take us through adding color and material to our 1-point perspective drawing using Photoshop. So if you haven't gone through and done it yet, make sure you go through and install Photoshop using the Creative Cloud and making sure it's up to date. Then go through and scan your drawing. So that should look like this. We will be able to go through and get rid of the spiral bounds and any little blemishes in there. Critical thing is making sure all areas are enclosed. So potentially we might want an additional line in this space here. And just making sure when the floor especially is not joining with the walls. So if we apply a color to the carpet, it's not then gonna recede and bleed up onto the walls. So everything needs to be nice and enclosed. When scanning, there's instructions there to go through and help you. Just make sure best to scan it as a JPEG rather than a PDF, which will automatically do. And best to scan it as grayscale rather than black and white. Otherwise, if it's a slightly or light gray line, it's going to convert it to white instead of converting it to black, and we'll lose that detail. So in creating this design, we're going to go to File, New, and select A4 and what orientation it will be. So in this case being portrait. If A4 is not appearing, it'll appear under Print and then go Create. Now we want to bring in our image, so our scanned image, and I can just click and drag that in. And now we want to make it a little bit larger, so it's going to trim out that spiral bound. And sometimes we might be able to see here where we're going to want this potentially different colors. So we want to make it a little bit bigger so it crops that out. Sometimes the scan hasn't scanned it necessarily straight, so Control R will bring up the rulers and you'll be able to drag a ruler onto your page or a guide, and then you'll be able to rotate the image to straighten it up a little bit. And so we can set that there. That looks really good. And I might just move that image across just a little bit. Whoops, too far. And you can use the arrows to make that a bit easier. Next is potentially getting rid of any little blemishes, and that can be used using the healing brush tool or spot healing tool. And then we can just get rid of some of these blemishes. This might come up, especially if you've scanned it as a PDF. So smart objects must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit, we can go okay. Sometimes that might not come up and you won't be able to proceed. So under layers, you just want to have it, otherwise it might have a little icon in the layer, and you can right click and then it will generally say rasterize. Because it's already rasterized, it's not giving me that option, so it'll be rasterized layer. Therefore, I should be able to get rid of any of these little blemishes that have appeared in the image. To make the brush bigger and smaller, just hit the brackets beside P, and that will be able to go through and do that. We're also going to want to be able to zoom in and move around the page, so Control plus and minus to zoom in. And really good if you've got an external mouse, because you'll find it a lot quicker. To pan around, you'll hold spacebar and then I'm just panning around. Otherwise, if you've got your, you'll be able to pinch pull, and if you've got your touch screen on. Next, we'll begin, I guess, applying color. What I've also gone through and completed is, if I can find Teams, I've got this image here, so I can even copy that image, and then in Photoshop, I'm going to, whoops, wrong image. We're going to use that later. Copy image, go back to Photoshop, Control V, it's not liking me to do that. I might just save that image, download. Open that location. And now I'll drag this into Photoshop. And then we have it. I'm just going to move that to the ceiling because generally all that color there is all pretty similar. And so now I'm going to use that image to then be able to fill in and zoom out this space. So on our layers, we're going to have the original layer, and I can turn this one on and off. I'm going to be drawing upon this layer, and I can be selecting colors based upon what's above, and I've sampled the size quite large, so it will average it out upon that area, so 50 pixels by 50 pixels. And then I can go through and use the paint bucket under the gradient to fill in those different spaces. Now notice it looks a lot darker here than it is there. So I think the color's about right. It's just the tone is a bit too dark. So that looks a little bit better. And that's what I'm going to go through and continue to do with the walls. Whoops, wrong wall. And use the paint bucket, filling upon this layer. And so everything it's on upon that orientation, I'll be filling it in that manner. Now thinking about where light's coming in, so some areas are going to be darker, like, whoops, that's probably going to be lighter. Like that top part. And that section in there. And then other areas are going to be lighter, so I can always go back and eyedrop this original color and then lighten it off a little bit. Paint bucket and fill those spaces in. Just because you spent all this time getting this detail, we don't want to have it all the same shade, because then you're just going to lose those shapes and forms that you've gone through and emphasize with that perspective drawing. So proceed on with that. The next step and my original drawing, you can see I've got some additional layers here. One is a shadow layer. So that's how I've gone through and added that detail in there. So let's do that now. Creating a new layer. And I'll call that shadows. And so the shadows I've just created there is just using the brush tool. You can use a black, or maybe it's a bit more of a gray. It's going to be better. Make sure the brush size is going to be the size you want it to be. So if we're going to do these posts, something similar to that. Now, it's going to be freehands. So if we want to have a straight line going out, you hold shift and go in the orientation that you want it to go through and complete. And then you just got to sort of press enter each time, otherwise it continues to draw a line. And so we can see we've got that there. And then I want a line roughly going in this direction. I would spend a lot more time doing that, but just doing it nice and quick for the video. It is quite dark. We will lighten it off shortly. Whoops. Keeps on getting me that. There's another one. And continue to go through and complete that as I've sort of shown here. And I've also made a little bit darker through here. And so to make it darker, or sorry, not as dark and intense, with the shadows, you're going to change the opacity for the whole layer. So it's a lot lighter. So it might be in the teens or in the 20s. So it looks a lot more sort of natural in terms of casting a shadow. So think about where shadows would be cast. If there's a light positioned here, is there a shadow being cast on there? Think about where the lights be natural or artificial lights that are in the building. The next step we want to go through and complete is potentially adding some gradients, especially to things like windows. So they look a little bit more frosted rather than just doing it. I mean, you could do them a really soft blue, but does it really still look like a window? And so windows you can be completing under the gradient tab. And so that will be positioned under the paint bucket if it's not shown. And then gradients will generally be appearing like this. So Clouds generally quite good. The greys are quite good as well. And then if I'm providing a gradient, it's going to go over a whole document. So I need to be selecting in the document. So I'm going back to that layer, that original layer, and making a selection. So in this case, I'm going to use the magic wand, and I'm just going to zoom on in, and I'm going to select in that space, and I'm holding shift and selecting in that space. But I don't want to add the gradient to this layer, just because if I make a mistake, it's going to ruin this whole layout that I've been working with. So I'm creating a new layer, and I'm just going to call this one Windows. And then upon that layer, I'm applying that gradient. And at the moment, I'm not very happy necessarily with that one. That one's looking a bit better. Oops. And I'll select another tool so we can see we've got some sort of texture happening in there, and I'm a bit happier with that as it sort of shows a bit more texture there. Last of all, it might be just applying. Some of you have got this brickwork, and some of you have drawn the bricks, some of you have the intention on getting an image of the bricks and then superimposing it in. And then this, I guess, will lead to the Me and My Buddies task is about using the green screen in the room next door, taking a photo of yourself and some friends, and then placing you within the scene. So we're going to get that angle correct, and we have to get somewhat the lighting correct, and definitely the angle of the photograph that's being taken upon. So I guess that sort of touches upon this applying this seamless texture, but we'll look at it more so later. How I've gone through and got these textures is if you just look up seamless brick or seamless concrete, whatever you're in need of, you're going to have that texture. And so I've just gone through and copied this image. Best if you go into the whole website, copy it there, jump back into our design, and then let's place it back in this location here as well. I don't necessarily need that top layer anymore, so I'm just going to paste it. And then let's move it into position. Now it looks like it's front on, so we need to have that perspective appearance. So I'm going to move it. There, and I'll make it just a little bit bigger so it fills the whole area. And so now we need to go through and distort it so it looks like it's sitting on the wall and not looking front on. So how we can do that is go to Edits, then Transform, and then you can play around with perspective, but another really easy one to play around with is just Distort. And so that's where we can get mainly those different corners, and then move it into position. Okay, so let's pop that corner in there and drag this corner down to where the bottom would be. And we can see how now it's starting to maneuver and looks like it's cast upon that wall. And so I'm pretty happy with that. I'd make sure the shadow layer is always on the top. So then if there's any sort of layers in those textures, are showing through. Obviously I'd do another copy of the brick and then be putting upon that original plane. So paste it. I could nearly use this one, to be honest. Try and speed this up a little bit. And then we want to cut out from this layer. So I'm going to select from that bottom layer, but I'm removing from this top layer. So I've made the selection on the original, that little portion, I'm going to this top layer, and now if I press delete, it's going to delete exactly what I want. So I need to inverse it. So I'm going to go up to select, inverse, and then delete, and it will delete everything else. And so therefore we'd want to go through and make that a little bit darker in sort of tone as well. So we'd add that to our shadow area and drag shadows up to the top here. And that will gradually get darker. All the best filling in your design. Then the next process will be bringing in your Me and My Buddies figures from the green screen. Thanks.